Hello. Hi, I think we're going to get started. Ooh, it's quite intense. Welcome to the Hawthornden. My name's Tor Scott. I am a curatorial assistant at the National Galleries of Scotland, and I worked for 12 months on the show upstairs, Grayson Parry's Smash Hits, with Patrick Elliott, our chief curator. And today I am delighted to introduce Louisa Buck, who'll be talking to us about Grayson and his work. So just a brief introduction of all the amazing things that Louisa's done. She's a writer and a broadcaster on contemporary art and has been a friend of Grayson's since the early 1980s. She's contributing editor and London contemporary art correspondent for the art newspaper and a regular reviewer and commentator on BBC Radio and TV. Louisa is an author for a number of catalogue texts at institutions including the Tate and the Whitechapel Gallery, as well as the ICA London, and has contributed to essays and catalogues for Grayson Parry's two major survey shows prior to this one. So there's one at the MCA in Australia and one at the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam. Her books including Moving Targets, 2, User's Guide to British Art Now, Market Matters, the Contemporary Art Collector's Handbook to Contemporary Art Collector's Handbook, co-authored with Judith Greer, and Commissioning Contemporary Art, a Handbook for Curators. She authored the Going Public Report, commissioned by Museum Sheffield, and was a judge for the 2005 Turner Prize. And she's also a founding member of the Gallery Climate Coalition. So without further ado, I'll now hand over to Louisa.
Thanks, Tor. Hello, everybody. Well, what an amazing show, Smash Hits. I mean, I've just gone around it for having a proper look, and my head is buzzing. And what I want to try and do, there's a plethora of information. And what I particularly love was seeing everybody going around and hearing Grayson's voice kind of cackling down their ears as well. So he's probably told you most of what I'm going to be telling you all over again, but I'm still very keen to draw out some key strands in Grayson's work, because I think I have charted his work for a very long time. And I think what's interesting is that a lot of what was there absolutely right at the very beginning. And we are beginning here with his first official plate, Kinky Sex, made in 1983. And he was making this at the time that he just began making pots in at Adult Education Centre. And I think it's very interesting that a lot of this stuff was here. He actually said, you know, tradition, subversion, decoration were the ingredients for my entire career. I just got better at making pots. You know, and I think here you can really see tradition, it's based on 17th century English slipware. It's highly decorative, lots of detail and subversion. You've got a cruciform figure in the centre. It was meant to be a kind of coin over the genitals, and when it exploded in the kiln. So then he said actually it's ejaculating money, because Grayson's always been very good at thinking on his feet. So also, this is very wonky because it was made in evening classes, but actually his pots, even the most accomplished later ones, I think, always have a handmade feel to them. He was not a pot thrower. This was not the idea. All his pots are coil pots, carefully built up. He's got better and better with the glazes, the sgraffito, all the different kind of layerings, but actually they're always emphatically handmade. So by the time he made this pot, he'd been to art school. Grayson is not some kind of outsider, self-educated person, although I would argue also one of my strands is going to be that he's been educating himself all the way through his career, and that's what he continues to love to do. And I'll also be talking about how much he does love so-called outsider art, but he absolutely isn't an outsider in the respect of being uneducated. He went to art school, he went to Portsmouth Polytechnic. There he was making works, not ceramics, or just a few ceramics, but very kind of oblique ones, because he was very much being versed in the world of 80s contemporary art, conceptual art, gestural work, figurative. This was an idea where you had to be absolutely heaving with conceptual ideas, with artistic gesture, with skill, and the idea of making pots was absolutely not a good idea. So then off he goes with his friend, his girlfriend Jennifer, living in his squat in London after Portsmouth Poly. Jennifer's sister, Christine Binney, who's going to be a key influence, she said, "Why don't you try ceramics?" And now he goes to the evening classes and he does this. And there he found his voice. And he said very much, the low station of pottery somehow acts as a semi-permeable membrane to keep me at an aesthetic and intellectual distance from the orthodoxies of the fine art world. So, yes, he was an insider in that he was educated, but he wanted to be an outsider in terms of pots. And I would argue that the humble status of the pot has served him incredibly well. He sees his pots almost as stealth bombs, he calls them, bringing in difficult, awkward, sensitive subject matter into this very domestic, very feminine, and that's another key thing I'm going to be talking about, aspect of his work. So therefore, the pot, there we have kinky sex. He also uses sex to be provocative, but I'm also going to be talking about the way in which his own conflicted, complex sex life is very much played through his work. And I would argue that the whole of Smash Hits Above Our Heads is actually Grayson very much on a journey, working out who he is, what he is as an artist, as a man, as a human being, and dealing with the various issues in his life, and coming through in resplendent manner as Sir Grayson, but also, as he puts it on a plate, Sir Pervert. And he did say, when I interviewed him recently about this show, he said, do they not look at my work? I may become a treasure of the establishment, I may be this wonderful orthodox figure, but have they not looked at what I actually put on these artefacts? Like that is so true. And also, the consistency. He talks about drawing. Drawing is key to him. And you'll see also upstairs in the show some really beautiful pages from his textbooks, from his sketchbooks. And these date from the early 80s. This is like 81 to 83. And it's all there. The beautiful line, the exquisite craft, the layering, the different influences, the kind of provocative subject matter, the found images. All these also play onto his pots. Another example here. So you've got some really quite serious stuff going on here at the same time as him being very jokey and very oblique and very subversive and very shocking. And he said very much that he loves religion, war. He said the connection between religion and fetishism still fascinates me. So, he's making these extraordinary sketchbooks, which he still makes now, and he makes all the way through his work. And I would argue that if I picked his pocket today and looked at the sketchbooks that he's now making, they would look very similar to these. I mean, the line might have got a bit more refined. There might be some, different aspects about social media or whatever, about today's life, but these are absolutely key to him. Draw, 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 accumulate. He's an omnivore, Grayson, picking up all these influences all the way through. And as I said, this was made, even before he made his pots. These pages date from there. So that's remained very much part of his sort of key preoccupations. Sex, war, and gender, he said, are the subjects that are part of me and fascinate me, and I feel I have something to say about them. So when I met Grayson, this was him, this angry, conflicted, very kind of feeling his way, making willfully wonky pots, not quite sure what he was doing, with his girlfriend Jennifer, who at this point was rather better known than him, with Christine as well, living in the squat in Mornington Crescent in London. And there's a rather more youthful me next to Grayson, and we're on the stand of James Birch's booth at the Earl's Court Art Fair. I mean, Earl's Court now has been razed to the ground, let alone the art fair. And you can see there's Christine Binney at the end, Jennifer, Grayson's then girlfriend, somebody called Kath and somebody else, I can't remember who he is. But you can see these are Jennifer's paintings in the background. And you can see it's very hippie, it's very dense, it's very kind of, it's very un-80s. It's very un-shoulder pads, red braces, large mobile phones, Robert Palmer, you know, asymmetric haircuts. It's an exuberant outpouring of sort of feminist excitement. And there are Grayson's pots to the right. And you can see here, you know, Jennifer was very much centre stage. And I was working on the booth at that time. So, you know, we have this very much this relationship. Grayson was Jennifer's very kind of grumpy, handsome Essex boyfriend. And the plates were all sold out at his first show at James Birch Gallery in 1984. So he made me one for myself. I think it cost me, I don't know, 70 quid maybe. And I've still got it. It's got its pride of place. And you can see here in my kitchen hanging, and now in a rather good box. It was on a kind of Woolworths plate holder for a very long time, hanging above the bread bin. But I decided perhaps as Grayson's price has rocketed, I ought to perhaps change the hanging equipment. But it gives an example. It's not just me showing off my collection, but it also shows a lot of what Grayson was about then. It was 1984 he made me, it was 85. And, you know, he's got LB are my initials at the top underneath the bust, and the L is in the shape of a pound sign. So already he's kind of mocking his clientele. It's called The Face of a Man is My Rightful Throne. Well, I won't spell it out to you. If you look closely, it's a very rude pot. And, you know, that is actually being enacted, that sitting on the face of a man. So, you know, he was making these, but it's very beautiful. You've got the broken pediment, you've got the gorgeous colours. Even then, right at the beginning, the gorgeous drawing, the sgraffito, you know, the skill is there, but it's a wonky skill. So he's playing already the paradoxes that run through Grayson. I think it's something I really want to bring out in this talk. Constantly, you'll say something and there's a flip side. And I think this plate certainly shows this. And there I am in full 80s regalia, holding my plate rather casually, with a Jennifer Binney pig in the background, and that still hangs with great joy on my sitting room wall. So, you know, it was very much the time was, we were all very kind of angry about what was going on with Thatcher, with the miners, with the fact that this is macho culture, you know, loads of money, this sense of the beginning of the, you know, obviously now it all looks rather naive because the gulf between the rich and the poor has become so huge. And, you know, we were kind of being a bit dilettante, I suppose, making artworks and writing about art. But there was a real feeling of wanting to provide an alternative view. So there, yes, my younger self. And look hard at that pig, because now you'll see a very similar aesthetic running through the neo-naturists. And this is the group that Grayson was part of, with Christine. It was really founded by Christine and Wilma Johnson at St Martin's School, Wilma was. And Christine was living around the corner in a squat with some unknown singer called Boy George something or other. And so there they all were, in these squats in London, with Jennifer and Grayson, joined them from Portsmouth. And Grayson isn't in this particular set of pictures ripped from my photo album, but this was a neo-naturist performance at James Birch Gallery. And the neo-naturists, I mean, it was jokey, but it was also kind of meaning it. They had this body painting, the smell of patchouli was heavy in the air, they'd do these deliberately amateur performances, elaborate rituals at nightclubs like the Wag and Billy's, where there were also people in asymmetric haircuts and peg-top trousers, looking completely mystified at these kind of lengthy menstrual performances, which are very much about, you know, sort of 60s counterculture meets the Brownies, or meets the Women's Institute, and they do elaborate cooking rituals. I mean, you can't realise how deeply unfashionable it was. Also, real bodies, big bosoms, you know, none of this kind of perfect model stuff. This is the time of Helmut Newton, you know, and spiky stilettos. They were very much against all that. It was very much about being women, but involving men as fellow playmates, not as kind of, you know, objects of ridicule or as authority objects. And here's Grayson in full neo-naturist swing. This is taken, I think it was at the Fridge in Brixton, this particular performance. So, you know, he'd also done a whole week with a neo-naturist, doing a whole week set of performances at the B22 Gallery in Wapping, where they acted out some different scenario with different kinds of body paint every day. And it was there, I think, that James Birch picked him up because a young dealer called Tim Proust had spotted Jennifer's paintings and gone down there. But it was a very free-floating, bohemian scene. He was in the squat in Mornington Crescent, as I said, with Christine, with Jennifer, with Kerith Wyn Evans, who's now a top-of-the-range white cube artist, with John Mabry, who's a famous filmmaker now. It was a very kind of free-floating scene. Boy George round the corner with Christine. All these kind of very much Lee Bowery, Trojan, so, you know, nightlife, fashion, art, filmmaking, and Grayson and the Neonaturist made a lot of fantastic wonky Super 8 films as well, which were really influential on Grayson. So, you know, there he is, being this kind of feminine, feminist, performative, anti-establishment, very much kind of, you know, going into archaic, ancient ritual, and we'll be seeing that playing out over his pots as well. And also at the same time, I met Claire, because Grayson was absolutely, at that point, you know, totally practicing transvestite. He had been ever since he was a teen. I mean, he actually says, you know, he always says, no, I have a strong brand, I'm a transvestite potter. And when he got the Turner Prize, it's about time they gave the Turner Prize to a transvestite potter from Essex, and there was much laughter, and there he was in his little Bo Peep outfit. But actually, it's not a gimmick, it's a real thing. He's smart enough to know how useful it's been in the art world, and indeed the world in general, and now has become this national treasure in many a frock. But, you know, it's a proper part of his psychology. And he said, you know, his first excursion, you know, in 1975 was when he actually sort of was seen in public in women's clothes, and that's when he said Claire was born. So he says, and this is a quote from him, "I don't want to be a woman, I'm a transvestite. I feel compelled to dress like this by a part of myself that is burning to find expression, a part that is vulnerable, softer, gentle, wondrous, and even sweet, a part that as a boy I buried as a survival strategy in a harsh environment." So, you know, this is deep stuff. It looks jokey, it looks funny, and actually quite a lot of the jokiness is part of its point, because it is sort of ridiculous. And actually that ridicule is part of why it's so important to him. And this harsh environment, which plays out in his pots, plays into Claire, was really a very harsh environment. He was born in 1960 in Chelmsford in Essex, and then they lived in a nearby village for most of his childhood. When he was about 4 or 5, his father left the family home because the mum had been having an affair with the milkman. Again, that sounds very Benny Hill and funny, but actually it wasn't funny. The milkman was a deeply violent, horrible man who was Grayson's stepfather. And really his years from 1965, age 5, to 75, age 15, was spent in an abusive, violent, really horrible atmosphere and a horrible place to be. And I think it left terrible scars. The stepfather's hobby was wrestling. Let's not say any more about that. You know, he was a bully, he was violent. So Grayson the child, he's written about this copiously, and indeed talked about it copiously throughout the exhibition and all the exhibitions he had. But I think it's really important still to focus on this, because it still, I think, underpins, to put it horribly, the very best of his art comes out of this ambivalence, these troubles, and this very kind of, you know, these deep schisms in his life. So, you know, he retreated into a fantasy world in his bedroom, tin soldiers, jet planes. He thought about joining the army at some point. Alan Measles, his teddy bear, became this presiding figure, and there'll be more about Alan Measles in a minute. But there he was in his bedroom, you know, retreating into this world. And he said, "My childhood and teenage years were a stew of feelings that eventually became strands in my practice, my work and life in tandem." So I think, you know, Claire there from an early age, and we're going to focus on Claire a bit more in a minute, but this was also Grayson, you know, laddie, extremely gorgeous, still gorgeous, Nordic gorgeous good looks, loved his motorbike, was very much, you know, a blokey Essex bloke. I've been on holiday with him, the guy can eat carbs, you know, he rides his bicycle, he's very much a manly man at the same time as he then can switch into dressing as Claire. And I think that's important also to hold on to that. In fact, the earliest work in this show is this beautiful early English motorbike helmet dating from 1981 while he was still at art school. And it's in cast metal, so it's not pottery, but you can see here, loving motorbikes. Also, this is something that I think is very important because it's a macho Grayson, but also the Grayson that loves ancient artifacts, loves prehistory, loves ritual. And you'll see this, and you have seen this, all of you have seen this show. This runs through his work, this kind of sense of the primeval, the ancient. He's so good at distressing, you know. Stuff looks so old there. I mean, some of the pieces in this exhibition are remarkable. And I think this is a very important piece, as important in a way as the Kinky Sex Plate, to show the other side of Grayson and another really important strand, the notion of tradition. He's always playing with and off traditions. You look at the shape of his pots, he'll use classic shapes, Chinese ginger jars, classic Greek shapes, classic neoclassical shapes, and then subvert them. Right? This relationship between tradition, continuity, craft, making, and then very contemporary subversion, throwing it on its belly, I think is very much part of what makes his work as great as it is. So there he is being... And again, look here, I mean, how subversive can you be? I mean, he's brave, isn't he? There he is at Essex Biker Convention in his Essex Man bike leathers, I mean, and the thing is, because he's got a real bike, because he knows about biking, he talks the talk, he walks the walk with a great big phallus, appliqued onto his leathers. And that's just Grayson incarnate again, isn't it? Again, he's playing with something really quite serious, the macho nonsense of men straddling, throbbing motorbikes and feeling manly, but also loving it himself, total speed freak, absolutely self-confessedly addicted to adrenaline, to thrills, to driving at high speed, loves the motorbike leathers, but also takes the piss out of himself and them because of that. And I think that's, again, why he's become so good as a television presenter, because he can really communicate with so many people on so many levels. He doesn't alienate them. You would think that would be the most alienating thing you could do, to turn up to a bikers convention in that kit. But no, absolutely not. And of course, we see the bike later on in this exhibition, and we see it, it's called Kenilworth AM 2010, and it's integrated into his work, but the title of the work actually relates to a company that he and Alan Measles set up in his childhood bedroom, where Alan was his bodyguard, and I think he was Alan's bodyguard, and he was also Alan's designer, and they set up this design company. And this was the first piece of artifact, decades later. He remembers this, and it becomes this custom-made bike. So, at this point, Grayson is getting other people to do his work for him to a certain extent. But, I mean, this is meticulous. You've looked at that, I'm sure. The speedometer, every detail of that bike is designed by Grayson. Somebody else might have actually done the manufacturing, but rather like, an architect doesn't lay bricks. But, it's absolutely him down to the nth degree. And he went round Germany on this bike with Alan Measles in the back like a reliquary. And I haven't got a picture, but you can easily dig one out of the most amazing costume that he wore. I mean, move over Essex Man leathers. I mean, this was the most extraordinary applique leather extravaganza that he went round Germany wearing as the guardian of Alan Measles in the reliquary. The Alan Measles you see upstairs is not the real Alan Measles, because Alan Measles is far too precious to be lent to the likes of Edinburgh National Galleries. He remains firmly in Grayson's home. So you've got a surrogate Alan Measles upstairs, nicely distressed. But the real Alan Measles went round. And the reason he chose Germany was apparently because that was the official enemy that he was growing up with. The parents, it was always the Huns, the Germans. He grew up in the 60s. The parents still had the World War echoing in their ears. And also, I think the Germans became also a kind of surrogate for the horrible stepfather, who really was very anti-German. So in a way, it's like up yours to the stepfather, that he goes round in his ridiculous outfit with his teddy bear in a reliquary box all around Germany. Apparently the Germans loved it, by the way. But so, I mean, again, this is part of the ritualistic. He loves a shrine, Grayson, a reliquary. I mean, he's not really, he calls himself a Christian atheist, but he freely admits that he grew up, like all of us, or me certainly, steeped in the kind of ritual of Christianity. We may not believe in the stuff, but it still has a strong resonance. And I think, ex votos, reliquaries, rituals, sacred objects, again, play a really huge part in his work. And to a great extent, his work is that. So he continues to make pots. He's obviously getting better at making pots at this point. Look at the kind of amazing, it's always, they take these very traditional forms. And you've got Claire here now. Claire is now appearing on the pots. And the mingling of work and life and art, I think, is very interesting. And certainly at this stage, Claire was appearing on the pots much more. And this is called Sex and Drugs and Earthenware, which is one of my all-time favourite titles, by the way. And let's not forget as well what a great writer Grayson is. You know, I mean, the titles to his works are all fantastic. The stuff that he's written, books on his life, his writing is brilliant, the captions that you read, his accounts of his work. I don't really know why I'm standing here at all. I just flick a tape and have Grayson talk about it, because he's so articulate about his work, and actually putting texts on his pots is really important too. And he likes to combine often text and image, and really writes some rather wonderful poems sometimes on his pots as well. This one's based more on, I think it's a kind of, it was from some transvestite magazine where he put his credentials as Claire as a gorgeous sissy, seeks the position. It's like a sort of, you know, a little Lonely Hearts stating thing, but seeking, you know, humiliation, cock torture will change your body, you know, like, with the pussycat bow above. And actually on this pot as well, you can't see around the other side, but you've got Kurt Cobain, you've got Michael Jackson. This is before the whole full scandal of Michael Jackson erupted, but it was already a dodgy smell around him, the sense of Kurt Cobain. So it was about these kind of flawed rock and roll heroes, but also Claire. And again, paradox, you know, what could be different, what could be more antithetical than Kurt Cobain shooting himself in the head and filling himself full of heroin than a kind of beautifully glazed, you know, gilt pot with a teddy bear on it and somebody wearing a pussycat bow around their neck. So he likes playing all the time with paradox, with opposites, with all these different kinds of feelings. And he actually said, you know, I use clay, slip and enamel the same way I use paint, pen and collage in my sketchbooks. So, you know, the more proficient he got, he had to keep being wonky, couldn't make it look too good, but nonetheless he continued to be different, constantly playing, constantly undermining. I just want to show you a few pictures of Claire, because Claire, before Grayson had therapy between 1998 and 2004, and he's very interesting about that, because he said that a lot of artists fear therapy, because I think, you know, maybe if they sort out all their angst and their grief to an extent, that might actually ruin their creativity, or it might kind of dull things somewhat, or you lose that edge, you lose that anxiety. He's very articulate characteristically about it and says, actually, it's a bit like getting someone to tidy out your garden shed, throwing out all the rubbish so you can actually find your tools and use them properly. So he feels that actually therapy has helped his art to a great extent, not hindered it, and it's actually helped his artistic development. And I would argue that is the case, actually, because there have certainly been shifts in his art as a result of therapy. And one of the first shifts, I think, I'm just going to specify for a minute, is a shift in Claire, because when I knew Grayson, Claire was very much passing as a woman. It's a rather glamorous Essex housewife, scarily, in fact, like his mother. But we'll move slightly on from that. But Claire was, you know, very much, here's Claire in kind of suffragette mode on the steps of the Tate Britain, which at that point was the Tate Gallery. There was no Tate Modern at this point. No more art. Here is Claire in another Claire Edith. This is called Edith Perry. So it's sort of Claire's great-great-great-grandmother in some kind of Victorian crinoline. He's very good at making Claire play all these different kinds of roles and different kinds of modes. And, you know, she very much kind of enacted, rather like Alan Measles, we'll be talking a bit about in a minute, different kinds of... She became a very useful prop in his art making, basically. And this was around the time that he did an intervention in Lincoln Museum, where he was working with a collection there, and it was very much playing with an off Victoriana and sort of folk art, and so he assumed these different identities. He's very good at aping and appropriating and then using for his own purposes different styles and different periods. So around about 2000, after 8 years or so of therapy, Claire has her coming out party. Now, obviously, Grayson had been a transvestite since he was a 13-year-old boy, so there was no, it wasn't really a sort of public announcement of that. But it was more the fully evolved Claire. He realised that actually, in making the alter ego Claire, with his transvestism, pretending to be a woman, it wasn't about passing as a woman or looking like a woman. It was about wearing sensitive clothes, wearing frilly clothes, being a little girl. As I said in the earlier quote, bringing out that tender, that vulnerable side, which had nothing to do with trying to make yourself be passed as a woman or be mistaken as a woman in the street. It was about wearing the clothes that made you feel good about yourself, that comforted you, and brought out that sensitive child that had been basically, beaten into submission by the horrible stepfather all those years ago. This is very crude cod psychology from me, but this is the kind of nuances I think are quite important and explain a lot about Claire's appearance now and Grayson's appearance now. So, Claire's wonderful dress, there she was. And we were all there. Here we are. There's me, rather blurry picture, rather hot me. With James Birch, Grayson's then, who had been Grayson's gallerist. He wasn't Grayson's gallerist anymore, but James, as I mentioned, was the gallery from whom Grayson had his first show, and Grayson himself. And then, of course, now, this is sort of, in a way, from then on, this unleashed Grayson's alter ego. Unleashed. In fact, he doesn't even like me calling it his alter ego, so I'm going to stop doing it. I think to begin with, Claire was more of an alter ego. Now he says Claire is just me in a frock. And I think that actually is almost the result of all these years of therapy and these years of self-discovery, that now he just feels that, he can wear these outfits. They're now designed by St. Martin's students. They're almost like part of his artworks, or not his artworks, but their artworks. It's part of a persona. And in fact, in a way, it's become independent from the artworks now. That coming out dress was almost the last kind of Claire moment before Claire could just be part of Grayson's life and everyday life. So he doesn't wear this stuff in the studio. This is for going out. This is for performative. This is for kind of displaying yourself. So, the many modes of Claire, I think, are very important. And actually, to pick up, he says, so what are you going to wear to pick up your knighthood then, Sir Grayson? A suit of armour? He said, no, because it's the new Carolinian era. He's going into the era of Charles I and Charles II. So he's wearing lots of ruffs and frills and furbelows and hopes it isn't too hot that day. So the other key figure is the famous Alan Measles. So this is the real Alan Measles, not the surrogate Alan Measles that we see upstairs. And again, I'm not just trying to be kind of, naffly psychological about this, but I do think it's really important because these are not just funny gimmicks. Of course, they're partly that. He's smart enough, again, to know that they have these roles, but they actually have a very profound personal role for him. So this is the famous Alan Measles, who he had when he had measles, and Alan apparently was the name of the bloke next door, and he was just called after the bloke next door when the 3-year-old Grayson just gave him that name. And he's this precious kind of talisman who's been very much this motif, very much the motif of being a part of the pottery. In the early days, you can see that absolutely physically appearing. Bad art, bad pottery. This is of 1996. And again, you've got Alan Measles, but acts of utter depravity taking place all around him. You can't really see, but, trust me, they are. It's all sorts of terrible BDSM, sort of violent stuff going on, again, etched into the sort of shiny surface of a pot. And again, this paradox. Again, there's Alan almost like being the safeguarder, being the person who protects, but also just the contrast, just the sheer paradoxes of it all. He also pops up on Grayson's coming out dress, but not a very cuddly Alan there. Very phallic Alan with his. I think you can now buy him as a fridge magnet in the gift shop. So it's come full circle that you can do this. But again, you see, looking at this, I think is another very key thing in Grayson's work that makes the art police, even though he's won the Turner Prize, spit with venom about him, is how incredibly decorative his art is. And I'm old enough to remember when decorative was a really dirty word. And now, actually, it's not such a dirty word, in great part, thanks to Grayson, showing that ornament, lusciousness, loveliness is key. And he also, by being decorative, you can get away with murder. Putting a little, green ribbon around an upright penis makes it look a lot less threatening. It sort of ridicules it. Alan is a horrible sort of fangy, club-wielding Alan, but done in embroidery in gorgeous colours, with a very keen decorative aesthetic. Immediately neutralises him while actually enabling him to be Trojan horsed, like all the stuff on the pots, into different environments. So he uses the decorative very cleverly, a little kind of cartwheel of cocks over there. The closer you look, the closer you see these kind of decorative motifs actually really bawdy, really transgressive, but kind of then reined in again. So it's this playing with and off paradox I think is really important. And Alan Measles is a key kind of vehicle for that. This is wise Alan. This is sort of Asian kind of guru Alan. And this is when Grayson had a show in Japan. He made this piece particularly for that. So, he's slightly mocking all the time. He's on dangerous ground. But, he manages through sheer skill, charm, and a keen aesthetic eye, and the way that he obviously really cares about the kind of motifs that he's appropriating. He obviously really has looked very hard at the certain kinds of pottery figures that this particular image then takes on as a mantle. This is one of my favourites. This is Outsider, Alan, 2018. Made to be like a kind of fetish object. I'm going to be talking a bit more about this, about how much Grayson really does love outsider art, ritualistic art, obsessive art. And I mean, he's absolutely terrifying, but also a kind of absurd cartoon figure. It's kind of Pebble Dash, but also has a kind of fetishistic power. And again, that's this flipping between benign and really quite dark and really quite scary. And I think this is what's such a clever kind of way to can keep it moving. Or a plate that's in the show upstairs as well, which is aspects of my sexuality and gender dressed up as colonial settlers. So there's Alan again, and there's Claire. You know, I mean, mocking, but these are really serious parts of his sexuality and gender. And of course, there's a whole raft of stuff you've got here. You've got, you know, settlers, the whole settler culture, highly problematic, displacement of indigenous people. You've got, you know, acting out. Now the whole kind of gender fluidity debate means that, you know, acting, dressing as a woman, dressing as a man, assuming different identities. It's quite static categorization. A lot of people criticize you that. He knows that even this little humble ceramic plate, based on the slipware, you know, it's a more accomplished version of the earlier kinky sex plate, carries a raft of socio-political, economic, cultural, gender issues, you know. And how brilliant to have it so kind of distinctly and discreetly summed up. Also what he really opposed, and this is the whole wonderful, these. And so early on, he was also, the art world became very much an object of his ire. Now, I had to have another little kind of Louisa Swank moment, because until I saw your catalogue and came to the show, I had no idea that he'd made me for my son's birth, which is quite a niche market, because it's Alfie on the front, but there's me giving birth on the sides. So it's not I mean, I hasten to add, Grayson was not there. This is from Grayson's feverish imagination. But I had no idea that at that time he was making a whole series of pots. I gave him, again, a couple £100 to make me a plate or a mug, just to mark the momentous fact that I had a child. This is now over 30 years ago, by the way, as you can see from the date. But I had no idea that he was making also these other ones. So I now feel that perhaps I'm slightly contaminated by the trophy to good taste, one of the many people that he was mocking at that point. But, you know, a ginger jar, I mean, it's a very generous act on my behalf, I have to say. It's one of my most treasured possessions. But anyway, there we have, you know, him taking the mickey out of good taste. These pots have a public front, trophy for good taste, my son, but round the sides and the back, you've got all sorts of scatological stuff, great big applique vulvas, in this case, me giving birth, saying it's reminiscent of the Viennese actionists, deep blood reds and purples, apparently I'm saying. You know, all these kind of mocking the cultural elite. Mocking here, you know, the sense of aesthetic feelings, the sense of, this is called I Was an Angry Working Class Man. You know, the autobiography is still there. There's a beautifully engraved gold penis on the side of this beautiful ginger jar. On the top, you've got a dog that's been kicked into subservience. Or this is called Boring Cool People, 1999. Attacking consumerism in the art world again, you know. And so by the time, you know, we're coming up now to the end of his therapy time, 1999. And by this point, his work shifted from being quite so overtly sexual, quite so overtly autobiographical. He was still very much there, but it's broadened out to wider issues. And the art world is very much one that he's always had his sights on. Biting the hand that feeds it is the kind of understatement of the year where Grayson's concerned. Boring Cool People, of course, love to be parodied. I'm sure a boring cool person bought that pot. Well, this one, which I love, is based on the Turner Prize seating plan. It is the Tate's Turner Prize seating plan. He actually asked them for it. So you've got this sense here of you know, them actually, you know, jockeying for position. It's all about the art politics. But also there's a very good piece in the show upstairs called Personal Creation Myth, which makes a plan of himself as an artist made about the same time, with all the different kinds of preoccupations, power, curiosity, power in the penis of the figure, curiosity in the frontal lobes of the head, a diagram of himself as an artist. So at the same time as he's mocking the art world, he's also acknowledging the fact that he wants to be part of it, and he is part of it. And, you know, I think we just want to have a little moment about influences here. I mean, in his ability to be able to look carefully at the world, at the way that the world is, to satirise, I would argue that, you know, Hogarth, Gilray, Rowlandson are key influences on Grayson. I mean, he's not a great lover of contemporary art as an influence. Really, when contemporary art is referenced, Rothko's, all sorts of Kiefers, whatever, they're to parody them, not to actually have them as an influence. But Hogarth, particularly the Rake's Progress, that great series of paintings to be seen in the John Soane Museum, absolutely part. And in fact, they were the direct influence of a series of tapestries which are also upstairs, The Vanity of Small Differences. And these are just the last two of them. And you can see actually the bottom one is almost directly influenced by that reclining figure in the Hogarth. But of course, it's not just influenced by that. There's a whole raft of different influences that go through his work. But this one was particularly brilliant, I think. And this was actually made in conjunction with a TV series called Who Do You Think You Are? And it was, I mean, directly based on Hogarth's cycle. Hogarth's hero is called Tom Rakeworth. Grayson's is called Tim Rakeworth, and it's the same. You know, he goes through the class system. I mean, you've all seen the tapestries upstairs. Take a look, and he's a digital startup. It gets sold for a lot of money. He buys a posh house. He becomes a member of the middle classes. Grayson's so good on the middle classes. Having become a member of the middle classes, he's particularly brilliant, coruscatingly spotting the brands, all these different kinds of aspects. The commercialism, and then at the end there's a sort of tragic end where he dies like a boy racer, even though he's a rich guy with his young girlfriend. And interestingly, all the way through, you see a little dog there. Hogarth always put his dog, Trump, rather unfortunately named as it turned out, in all his paintings. And in homage to that, Grayson's got his little Trump in all of them. Trump, unfortunately, is dead in the bottom, and lying on a little Trump stretcher at the end. So you've got this sense of, you know, very much looking at these different kinds of aspects of social history. Many of you, I'm sure, have seen his many television programmes. He started off doing the first one just when he finished his therapy, called Why Do Men Wear Frocks? And since then he's done them about class, about identity, about masculinity, and he's really good at it. Apparently, a Damascene moment was when with the commissioner of Channel 4, he said you ought to be more in your programmes. He was like, but I'm not, and I'm an artist. I'm not a TV presenter. She said, yes, so make art in the programmes, and actually making these arts in the programmes, I think, has made a huge difference. And you know, they come out as part, and this is part of one of the series there. So looking very much at these different kinds of ways, he's won BAFTAs now, looking at the way in which class and identity play out is a crucial part of his work. But another key influence that I really want to draw out is outsider art. He loves outsider art, so-called outsider art. We don't really call that anymore. It's more like art from people who are untrained, people who are not in any way part of the art world, but people who are untrained artists, but nonetheless obsessively make art. Often people with mental health issues, often people in institutions, people who make compulsively, obsessively, which I would argue artists do as well. There's not that much difference, really. I mean, once you start to navigate all these kind of differentials. And this has been a crucial aspect of Grayson's work right from the word go. Really right from when, 1979, he went to an outsider show at the Hayward Gallery. And there he saw particularly the work of Henry Darger, and these are a couple of Henry Dargers here, who was a reclusive Chicago hospital janitor who'd been abused and neglected as a child, who made this extraordinary, like 15, when he died, they found 15, in his flat in the 1970s, they found 15,000 pieces of paper with these extraordinary scenarios playing out of the Vivian girls, these brave little schoolgirls fighting against the armies and the soldiers. And I don't think Henry Darger had ever actually seen a naked girl, so a lot of these girls were like hermaphrodite with sort of male genitals, that's the only thing he knew. And so Grayson immediately had a terrific sense of empathy with these, and said they were like his pots rolled out, these brave little girls in their frilly dresses fighting the soldiers. It was Grayson back in his bedroom again, really, with Alan Measles as his defender. So you've got this sense, you know, very much of this kind of outsider, ritualistic art, non-Western art. These are his main influences. Yes, the British Hogarth, the Gillray, the cartoons, the satire, but really the art influences are by and large non-Western or prehistorical or indeed outsider or outside the art world. And I think that's quite an important, you know, thing to bring through. And these girls appear on his pots, literally. You'll see quite a few of them upstairs as well, little girls in frilly dresses. And this is an extraordinary one, which is Dolls at Dungeness, September the 11th, 2001. Vivian girls from Henry Darger on a pot to commemorate 9/11. And this is another shift that came about, I think, as a result of Grayson having therapy, that he concentrated more and more on these socio-political issues in his TV series, but also on his pots. And very few artists made work in response to 9/11. I mean, later on, Luke Toymans painted some flowers, but, you know, brave again. It was a really, you know, extraordinary subject for an artist to make work on, and on a gilded pot, you know. So again, he's very brave, I think, in this respect, Grayson, but very politically aware. Although actually early on, it wasn't just as a result. It's kind of neat little creation myth thing to say, oh, he had therapy, and then suddenly it all became about other things apart from himself. This is actually a Gulf War dinner service in 1991, before he even began therapy. So, you know, he was always politically aware up to certain points. And again, his response to the Gulf War, you know, was to make a dinner service, to have this kind of, you know, the most kind of coruscating political comment onto a plate. Or a series of works that I really find extraordinary, around about 2000, based on child abuse, something which I'm afraid to say he had more than a small degree of personal experience in. And this is called We Found the Body of Your Child. And it's based partly on a Bruegel Hunters in the Snow painting, but also, I mean, it's just devastating. This figure in the front of the mother screaming because the dead baby's been found. And then all these horrible phrases, you'll spoil him, horrible little brat, all these kind of abusive phrases going on. I mean, again, it could be so toe-curlingly naff and awful to have this kind of serious subject matter on a gilded pot. But I think his skill, his intensity, and this is another side of it, you know, make it something that's incredibly, I think, profoundly affecting. And I think these are things that get sometimes cast aside in the myth of Grayson. You know, the fact that he's playing with taste so much. You know, so much of his work is about playing with and off notions of good taste. But when he really cares about something, I think, you know, it's really, really evident. There's a whole series of works he's did on child abuse that have horrible, horrible titles about, you know, bruises, pattern of bruises and cigarette burns, one's called. You know, but to put this on a pot and to do this, I think, is really remarkable. And we also have Claire being a political figure. Claire is the mother of all battles, 1996. You know, as he was having therapy, he was moving towards using other materials. But again, you know, the mother of all battles, we're talking the middle of the Balkans. This is the Balkan War time now, when really, you know, appalling violence was happening, different kinds of communities, ethnic cleansing, you know, all these kind of, you know, America rattling its sabre. What does he do? What's Grayson's comment? He puts Claire in kind of folk costume, you know, like so many kind of Balkan folk costumes, with this applique of burning planes, of people being shot. Again, totally ambivalent. You know, he doesn't like, he wags a finger, but it's a kind of crooked finger. It's a finger that could be seen as a camp finger at the same time as it's being wagged. He always likes to keep his options open. And nowhere more so. Oops, sorry, hang on, it's gone back too long. This one, Right to Life quilt, 1998. You know, quilt making's big in America. Now it's very big with G's Bend quilts. It's become part of a whole kind of other view. But also the notion of making AIDS quilts, commemorative quilts. This is a quilt, a Right to Life quilt. So there he is. He plows straight into the abortion debate, making a quilt with these fetuses on them and pools of blood. I mean, not something you'd normally expect to see on an applique quilt. And he's not making a point about being pro-abortion, against abortion. He's just making this extraordinary object that just throws up the complexity, throws up the repulsiveness. The fact that also, just on the most purely aesthetic level, you've got that tumbling tile geometric motif with all this messy, organic stuff on the top of it, you know. I mean, really playing with opposites and playing with very, you know, aspects of tradition that don't normally get treated in this way. Really uncomfortable, you know. And I think that's something one has to remember with Grayson. He's become a sort of national treasure now, and I think he's at his best when he's at his most uncomfortable. And this was his first textile that he made. This is upstairs in the show, Vote Alan Measles for God. This is his first tapestry. But, you know, it's Alan Measles now as a suicide bomber, sitting on top of the Twin Towers. You know, it's again, using taste, good taste, bad taste, using his highly aesthetic skill to make a beautifully decorative object based on Afghan rugs, based on all these different kinds of languages and motifs. So you're kind of bamboozled into not realising quite what you're looking at. Then you realise what you are looking at, and it becomes very affecting. So this is part of, I think the therapy very much unleashed him. He still makes about 50% of what he makes are still pots, but he's gone into all these different media now, and textiles has been a very productive one for him. I mean, he doesn't actually physically make them, obviously, he's not a tapestry weaver, but he's meticulous in absolutely, you know, overseeing every aspect of them. The Walthamstow tapestry, 2009, which is upstairs, you'll see it. It's the ages of man. So he's taking this medieval theme, the ages of man, but through consumerism, through consumer brands, through these different kinds of objects, but all the way through Gap, Nestle, Saga, all the way through your different aspects. I'm aware that time is ticking on, so I'm going to whiz on a bit now. But just, I wanted to give you, it's so hard to be concise about Grayson because there's such a wealth of detail in what he does. This, I think, is remarkable. He may not make these tapestries himself, but my God, he makes sure that the people he works with push the medium to the very nth degree. This is a beautiful one, I think, the Battle of Britain, 2007, this dystopian landscape. And, he puts smoke, he puts graffiti, all these things woven into tapestry weave. And also, let's not forget Essex, another major theme. He grew up in this, benighted Essex, the English county, which I'm part of as well. I grew up there as well, so that's another thing we had in common. And, there he makes the flatlands of Essex, which, are an acquired taste. I mean, Essex is quite a rough and ready place. But, he makes in something ethereally beautiful, but also entirely itself. And I think that, again, the paradox is Essex can be very rural, very picturesque, and also utterly bleak and utterly blighted. And again, these paradoxes play through his work. And this one too, this is again, look at him taking the mickey out of the art world again. Large, expensive, abstract painting of 2019. So he's art baiting yet again, but very much aware of the class privileges that underwrite these artworks. And here he starts making maps. Again, round about the time he finishes therapy, he starts doing this. It's another way to map out his psychology. He calls this a self-portrait. This is his first map of 2004, a map of human emotions. So always highly personal. And there's all kinds of personal stuff here. Or here, this is actually a portrait. You can see his head at the top. Map of Nowhere, self-portrait based on Thomas More's Utopia. And again, everything changes. Out of his anus comes sort of, blinding light onto a little shrine. But he's also got at the very centre of his psyche is kind of doubt and despair as the centre of everything. Or this extraordinary work, which is on the wall here, Map of Nowhere. Now this, American Dream, 2020. Now one of his many, I think, really brave TV programmes was his Grayson's American road trip, Big American Road Trip, where he went round America, Trump America, talking about class and race, down to the deep south, a white Englishman, and he did extremely well. I was really horrified when I heard about this. I thought, oh God, he's gone too far this time. This really is a step beyond. How big is your hubris, Grayson, to do this? But actually, it was an extraordinary series, and this map of this American Dream, he said, I love maps that have an air of authority. They show us where to go. This map toys with the common delusion that there's a clear and certain route out of our mess of feelings, because it is completely a mess, with Mark Zuckerberg at the very top. Well, I mean, we all know now, even more so, Mark Zuckerberg has messed with our feelings. And it's very much about, like the Walthamstow Tapestry, how social media, how consumerism tell us what to do. So they're still very moral, what he makes, I think. And going into different media. I mean, you've seen this in dominating the show, this extraordinary work. There's also those sculptures in iron as well, Our Mother and Our Father of 2009. Notice he doesn't use bronze. This is iron that's kind of workaday, that gets rusty. And he's made this show at the British Museum. He's done several shows now working with collections. The first one was in Lincoln, and then they did a wonderful series called Unpopular Culture, where he got all these artworks that have been completely forgotten that were very good, kind of modern British works. And that was down on the south coast. He showed that. I think it was the De La Warr Pavilion. And here he does the ultimate. He goes through 6 million artefacts. Well, he doesn't go through all of them, but he has the option to do so, of the British Museum, and makes this extraordinary show where he intersperses his work with the work of others. And he made this wonderful piece to pay homage to the unknown craftsman, because most of the work you see in places like the British Museum are made by unknown people, unknown craftsmen, people who make beautiful objects. And those little phials of glass you can't really see, but you see them upstairs. They have liquid, they say, is the blood, sweat and tears of the craftsman. But of course, Grayson's Gesamtkunstwerk, if I can use such a German term, his great cathedral, is his house for Essex. The Taj Mahal on the River Stour, It's really quite near where my mum lives, so we all had to help campaign with the very grumpy locals to get it agreed to be built, because you can imagine quite a lot of people have disapproved of it. So this is his, extraordinary. I mean, he obviously collaborated with architects to have this built. And here it's a shrine to the female equivalent, if you like, of his Tim Rakewell, a chapel, a non-denominational chapel. Patron saint is Julie Cope. You can see the cranes of Harwich just round the corner. Julie Cope, this Essex woman, a fictitious Essex woman, and inside, let's look at the outside first. You've got Julie pregnant, you've got Julie there like a Shilana gig, those female fertility figures on the outside of churches, the Essex insignia, a nappy pin for Julie's children. Then inside, this extraordinary kind of shrine to Julie, sculptures, tapestries. And you see this upstairs, you see the tapestries upstairs of Julie and her various men and Julie's life. And there she is. I love the fact that she is this figure that could have lived. And she starts off born on Canvey Island. She was in the Canvey Island flood in 1953, and then gets knocked off a motorbike in Colchester. So again, this kind of this morality tale. And Grayson, always the feminist. I'm liking the fact that continuity runs through his work. You've got this sense. This is an 1987 work. Remember the neo-naturists. Remember their visceral performances. He's very feminist, Grayson. He's a geezer. He's a biker. He's a transvestite. He also is extremely sympathetic towards kind of female ritual. And I love the way that his work has these full cycles. This is based on an Anglo-Saxon cremation urn. And this is actually called Anglo-Saxon cremation urn. This is 2022. And this is in the last room of the exhibition, based now on English identity, because this is not Grayson putting all his kind of confusion about women and life and transvestism and S&M and all this kind of stuff. This is more about Grayson looking at Englishness and looking at a blighted Englishness, a smoky, burning Englishness. We're coming up to the end now, but I'm just whipping through a last few just to show how much continuity there is. Here is Alan healing the wound. Alan is, he's like a kind of reliquary. He's also like an Indian chola sculpture. So again, Grayson mashing up all these different cultural references. And there is Alan, in a way, holding little baby Grayson, baby Claire, the tender self, on his lap. Again, still the protector. So these things still really matter to him, running through his work. And this series, one of the most recent pieces in the work, is this sacred tribal artifact, which says so much about Englishness still, but of course a blighted Englishness. The English lion is this manky old creature. Rather like on one of the last pots, as well as Sir Pervert, you've also got a pot of Alan Measles being knighted by King Charles. This sense of he's always somewhat taking the mickey. I mean, he did accept his knighthood, which I was quite amused to notice. But the sense of British is best and all these things are parodied, but within the parody, I would argue, is very much a part of seriousness. And I'm just going to end up by just saying, all of my humour is to defend the sensitive, tender self you need to operate as an artist. And I think that's what I do. He's part social anthropologist, part moral philosopher, but also wanting to make his work accessible, but also, I think, very much wanting to be problematic and cause problems, both to resolve them in himself, but to make us try and think about how we resolve them in ourselves. So thank you very much for listening to my mad Cresta run through Grayson Perry. And if you've got any questions, there's a roving mic. Do please feel free to ask.
So we've got a little bit of time for taking questions.
Sorry, I've run on a bit, but he is so difficult to truncate.
There are some lovely comments online. It's been very lively with our online viewers. So hello, folks. We've got people watching from Dunfermline, Kirkcudbright, Teenabruch, and also Canada. So hello. Hi, folks. And Hemphill from Canada was very much hoping that there'll be a showing of Grayson's work there at some point in the future. So I'm going to suggest that we take a question from the floor, and then if anyone wants to ask a question online, please, now's your moment.
Okay. Any hands up? Anybody wait for a mic? Yes.
Okay, just a second.
Hi there. Oh. Can I do it? Sorry to interrupt. Do you know why he picked the name Claire? Is it any particular meaning, or was it somebody new?
Apparently, Claire came from when Grayson went to art school. He met Jennifer Binney, his girlfriend, who I was talking about. Obviously, subsequently, he met and married Philippa, who's very much now his prominent, consort, wife, partner. In all senses. But when he met Jennifer, they were at art school together, and Jennifer was completely cool about Grayson's transvestism. And I think they were just thinking about a name to give her. And I think Jennifer suggested Claire, but just almost as a sort of random, generic, quite innocuous, but sort of feminine name, a vessel into which many different thoughts could be poured, I think. So I think it came from the woman.
Any other questions on the floor? Okay, we've got a couple at the back.
I saw you as well. So.
This is maybe a complicated question, but you mentioned the mother of all battles and the Balkans influence. So there's a general Eastern European folk art shading into Ukrainian folk art influence. Do you think that sprang from his fascination with those times of war in the 90s? Is that the root of it?
I certainly think that he's very aware and tuned into all kinds of folk art. And I think, because there was so much in the 90s going on with the Balkans, and that's, it was a very distinctive folk culture there, I think he's an omnivore, to be honest. I think there's not one strand or one kind of Ukrainian strand or Russian strand or Orthodox strand or Asian strand. I think it's a real mashup. And I think it just seemed like she was very much like a kind of freedom fighter. Marina Abramović at the same time was doing a lot of stuff about Serbian, when the Balkans were going on, because she was Serbian, about Serbian folklore and Serbian. Her parents were freedom fighters, Serbian freedom fighters. So, I think all that's feeding in, definitely. But I think it was a very good way to summon up a lot of kind of ethnic different divisions, but wearing that kind of outfit that immediately sort of debunks them at the same time as it reinforces them. So I don't know if that's answered your question really, but I think partly yes is my one-word answer. Yeah. Hi.
Hi. So there's a lot of freedom in his work, but do you know if he has constrained himself to touch some sensitive topic?
I think that's a very good question, and I think certainly at a time when it was very problematic with the whole Islamic situation, when there's a lot of self-censorship about that, about the sense of people being attacked for making work that was seen to be anti-Muslim, or indeed in any respect. That was a problematic time for him. So I think. But I don't think he ever thought, I can't touch that. I think he tried to find ways around it. I mean, 9/11, case in point, that's really sensitive at that point. Nobody really made art about 9/11. So I don't think overtly, but I think he wouldn't do something that would actually endanger himself or his family. But I think it's with him, it's highly subjective. I think it's what rocks his boat. But so long-windedly, I don't know, but I think short-windedly, I think that if he felt he needed to address something, I think he would. I don't think he's the kind of person who'd self-censor in that way, unless it was actually going to put him or possibly his family into jeopardy. So I think probably not.
Final question from our online audience. Beth Duffus asks, where does Grayson feel his art will go from here?
Oh, I'm so glad she asked that, because I forgot to say in my talk, he's writing a musical. He's writing I think he'll carry on making pots, by the way. He's got a show at the Wallace Collection in a couple of years' time. He will always make. And the one thing I didn't say was he's a maker. He really, really loves to make, and his work evolves through making. He often doesn't have an elaborate idea. It evolves as he makes it, either on the drawing or actually still with the clay. But the musical is ongoing because, rather like he's become such a success with the writing, he's also has singing lessons. I mean, he now sings in every exhibition opening he has. He'll do a little song. I think he did one here. I sadly couldn't come to the opening here, but he did. He's done it in the past. He also, of course, does his stand-up work, his shows, and he now sings on his stand-up shows that now tour the country. And now a full-scale musical is being written by the bloke that I think did Jerry Springer, the guy who wrote, a top of the range writer of musicals, because he always does the very best. As he said to me, I'm not going to do video art that somebody's going to see sitting in some uncomfortable seat if they're lucky in a dark gallery. I'm going to make a series of Channel 4 that people can see on their television sets. You know, if I'm going to do performance art, I'm not going to do performance art in some dingy old warehouse. I'm going to do it at the London Palladium, you know. And that's very much, I mean, you could say that's raging hubris and big-headedness. I would put it more as being someone who just wants to do the very, very best within the particular medium he's doing. So yes, Grayson Perry the Musical, coming soon to a theatre, well, quite soon, I think in a couple of years, for theatre near you.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for doing the very, very best by Grayson's work today. Please put your hands together for Louisa.
Thank you.